The gymnasium was glowing with strings of fairy lights, casting a warm golden glow over the polished wooden floor. Tables lined with sparkling cloths held plates of food and punch, and laughter floated through the air, mingling with the soft music playing from the speakers. The graduating class of that year had dressed in their finest, proud of the culmination of 12 years of work. Among them, a girl stood quietly, clutching the strap of her modest dress. It was simple, homemade almost, but carefully chosen. Her heart thudded as she scanned the room, hoping to blend in, wishing desperately to be noticed for her personality and effort rather than her clothes. She felt invisible in the crowd of sparkling gowns and tailored suits. Her classmates were buzzing around, sharing gossip, stories, and plans for college. She tried to smile, to nod politely at passing faces, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She had always been on the fringe, laughed at quietly for being different, or too poor, compared to the rest. Tonight, she told herself, she would simply survive the evening, stay low, and remember that her worth could not be measured by appearances. But she could not anticipate the cruelty waiting just around the corner. Her teacher, the class advisor, a woman whose words could often sting like a whip, spotted her from across the room. She paused, her gaze sweeping the girl's simple attire with unmistakable disdain. A smile, cruel and sharp, spread across the teacher's face. "This graduation is not for beggars," she shouted, her voice cutting through the laughter of the room. The words hung in the air, heavier than any weight she had ever felt. The girl froze, her stomach dropping. She could hear the sudden burst of laughter behind her, classmates pointing, whispering, some shamelessly snickering, others uncertain where to look. She felt her cheeks burn, her chest tighten. For a moment, all she could do was stare, frozen, as the world seemed to blur around her. Every insult she had ever heard, every harsh glance, every whispered joke in the hallways replayed in that single moment. She wanted to vanish, to escape into the night where no one could see her, to shrink into herself until the pain passed. And yet, beneath the humiliation, a flicker of determination ignited. She would not allow this moment to define her. She would leave, yes, but she would return, stronger, better, and undeniable. That spark, quiet and fierce, was the seed of her resolve. She left the hall quietly, her steps silent but her mind racing. Tears threatened to spill, but she blinked them back, refusing to give her tormentors the satisfaction. Outside, the cool night air embraced her, the wind tangling in her hair, carrying away some of the sting. She sat on the curb for a long time, alone, thinking. She promised herself that this humiliation, as sharp and piercing as it was, would be her fuel. It would not crush her, it would forge her. The years that followed were not easy. Life, as it often does, tested her resilience at every turn. She worked long hours in jobs that barely paid the bills, took evening classes, studied late into the night, sometimes so exhausted she could barely keep her eyes open. But she never let herself forget the promise she had made on that curb. Every small success became a triumph over the memory of laughter that had once echoed in her ears. She learned to budget, to invest, to build, to create opportunities where none seemed to exist. People laughed less at her as she quietly excelled, unnoticed, until her quiet growth became impossible to ignore. The struggle was real, punctuated by moments of doubt and fatigue. She saw friends settle into comfortable lives, content with mediocrity, and she envied them for a fleeting second before turning back to her own path. Each day, she reminded herself that the mockery of one night would never compare to the pride she would feel when she achieved her dreams. She read voraciously, studied business plans, networked, experimented, failed, and tried again. Every failure became a lesson, every small win, a step closer to the life she envisioned. The fire that had ignited that night of humiliation now burned steadily, an internal force that propelled her forward. 10 years later, the reunion invitation arrived. She looked at it quietly on her desk, fingers brushing the embossed letters. For a moment, she considered ignoring it. The memory of the gymnasium, the laughter, the teacher's cruel words, they all threatened to resurface. But she shook her head. This was her moment, not just for herself, but for every other person who had been mocked, overlooked, or underestimated. She would walk into that room with her head high, a testament to perseverance and strength. When the night of the reunion arrived, she entered the hall with quiet confidence. The once familiar gymnasium now seemed smaller, almost quaint. She wore an elegant dress, tailored perfectly to her form, her hair and makeup refined but understated. As she walked in, heads turned, not in mockery, but in admiration. Whispers followed her, some questioning who she was, others quietly impressed. She moved gracefully, greeting former classmates and teachers, her smile calm and assured. There was no need for confrontation, her presence alone spoke volumes. And then she saw her, the teacher who had once humiliated her. The woman's eyes widened in surprise, a flicker of recognition crossing her face, quickly masked by forced politeness. She wanted to say something, perhaps a clever remark, but words failed her. The girl who had once been the subject of ridicule now carried herself with an air of quiet authority, a presence that commanded respect. It was clear to everyone in the room that she had succeeded not in spite of the humiliation, but because of it. The teacher could only watch, powerless, as her former student moved through the crowd, greeted peers, and shared stories of accomplishments that left even the most skeptical classmates in awe. Instead of seeking revenge, the woman focused on inspiration. She had used the pain of that night as a catalyst for positive change. She had founded a charitable organization dedicated to helping children from underprivileged backgrounds discover and nurture their talents. She had become a beacon for those who were told they could not succeed, demonstrating that determination, resilience, and hard work were stronger than ridicule. By the time she left the reunion, she had left an impression far deeper than any words of mockery ever could. The laughter of that night, once so cruel, had become a distant memory, overshadowed by the quiet pride of achievement. She realized that true victory was not in humiliating those who wronged her, but in rising above, in building a life that spoke for itself. Her story became a lesson not just for her classmates but for herself. Dignity is maintained not by responding in anger but by succeeding with grace. And as she stepped out into the cool night air once again, she felt the same wind that had comforted her years ago, carrying away any lingering shadows, leaving only the warmth of triumph and the promise of even greater accomplishments to come. The gymnasium was decorated like a dream. Strings of warm fairy lights twisted around the pillars and balconies, casting a golden glow over the polished wooden floor. Tables lined with crisp white cloths were set with small plates of snacks and glasses of punch, and soft music floated in the air, mingling with laughter and chatter. Every student had dressed in their finest. Gowns shimmered, suits pressed perfectly, hair done up in curls and waves. The girl stood quietly in a corner, feeling like an intruder at a celebration meant for everyone else. Her dress was modest, homemade almost, simple yet carefully chosen. She had wanted to look presentable, but the difference between her attire and those of her classmates seemed like a chasm impossible to bridge. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, tugging nervously at the strap of her dress. Every glance she caught reflected polished elegance, confidence, wealth. She tried to smile politely at passing classmates, to nod when someone said hello, but she felt herself fading into the background. Her heart beat rapidly, a mix of excitement and anxiety. Tonight, she told herself, she would endure. She would attend this event, smile through it, and go home with her dignity intact. But a deep, gnawing fear lingered. What if her classmates saw her for what they truly believed, that she didn't belong? Her worst fears were realized in a moment she could never have predicted. Across the room, the class teacher, the woman responsible for guiding them through their final year, noticed her. She paused mid-conversation, eyes sweeping the girl's modest dress with unmistakable disdain. A slow, cruel smile spread across her face. The girl's stomach clenched. And then, cutting through the laughter and music, came the words, "This graduation is not for beggars." The gymnasium froze for a second, and then the laughter erupted. Fingers pointed. Snickers and whispers circled around her like a storm. Her face burned, heat rising to her ears and neck. Her chest tightened. She could feel the humiliation settling into her bones, seeping into every nerve, every muscle. The world seemed to collapse inward, shrinking until all she could see was the mocking faces around her. Did she really just say that? A classmate whispered, nudging another. She actually did, someone else said, trying to stifle a laugh but failing. The girl wanted to disappear. She wanted the floor to open beneath her feet and swallow her whole. Tears threatened to spill, but she blinked them back fiercely, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Every insult she had endured in her life, every snide remark, every whispered joke about her family's financial struggles, it all converged in that single, unbearable moment. She turned, almost mechanically, and walked toward the exit. Each step felt heavy, weighted with pain, anger, and embarrassment. Behind her, laughter continued, fading slowly as she left. The cold night air hit her face as soon as she stepped outside. She pulled her coat around her shoulders, shivering not from the temperature but from the storm of emotion inside her. She walked to the curb, sat down, and buried her face in her hands. For a long time, she sat there, thinking. She thought about every humiliation she had endured, every insult that had ever been directed at her. And slowly, a flicker of resolve ignited within her. This would not define her. This night, no matter how cruel, would be remembered not as the night she was humiliated, but as the night she decided to rise. She would leave the laughter behind. One day, she would return, stronger, confident, undeniable. That small spark of determination, quiet and fierce, took root in her heart that night, unseen by anyone else. Life afterward was not easy. The years that followed were filled with struggle, sacrifice, and constant effort. She worked nights as a waitress and barista, her body exhausted, her eyes heavy, but she never let herself quit. She attended classes during the day, her mind hungry for knowledge, for skills that could give her a future beyond her current circumstances. She studied finance, business management, and marketing, often falling asleep over textbooks in the quiet hours of the night. She was meticulous with her time, strict with her goals, and relentless in her pursuit of growth. Every setback became fuel. Every small victory was magnified in her mind, proof that she could achieve more than those who had laughed at her. She invested her earnings wisely, learned the stock market, started small projects, failed sometimes, learned from the mistakes, and tried again. She was no longer the girl who cowered in the corner at school. She was becoming someone capable of commanding respect, someone who could create opportunities out of nothing. Her friends often asked why she pushed herself so hard. They were content with ordinary jobs, comfortable lives, and casual routines. She envied them for a second sometimes, but it never lasted. The fire inside her could not be extinguished by envy or distraction. Every night, she remembered the laughter, the mocking words, and she transformed that pain into determination. She refused to allow herself to be defined by humiliation. She wanted to create a life where she could not only survive but thrive. Years passed. Slowly, steadily, she built her reputation. She started a small business, which grew into something larger than she had imagined. She invested in education, networking, and projects that allowed her to expand her horizons. With every success, she remembered the night of her graduation, the sting of ridicule, and she smiled quietly to herself, knowing that she had turned their laughter into her fuel. 10 years after that humiliating night, the invitation to the reunion arrived. She looked at it and considered ignoring it. Memories threatened to resurface. The mocking laughter, the teacher's cruel words, the shame she had felt. But then she smiled. No, she would go. She would walk into that room with her head held high, a living testament to perseverance, strength, and resilience. She was no longer a girl who hid in the shadows. She was a woman who had triumphed over adversity, and this night would only highlight her journey. The reunion was held in the same gymnasium, now slightly renovated, but still familiar. She entered, her posture straight, her steps confident. The elegant dress she wore hugged her form perfectly, understated yet commanding attention. Her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, her makeup refined but natural. Whispers immediately filled the room. Heads turned, eyes widened. Some classmates squinted, unsure if they were recognizing her. Others looked impressed, even intimidated. She greeted people warmly, shaking hands, offering polite smiles. Her voice was calm, assured, a stark contrast to the nervous whispers she had once been subjected to. She could see the surprise and admiration in many eyes. The contrast was undeniable. The girl who had once been laughed at now radiated confidence, grace, and undeniable success. Then she saw her, the teacher who had humiliated her so publicly. Her eyes widened in disbelief, her mouth opening slightly before closing again, caught between recognition and the inability to form words. She had expected arrogance, perhaps confrontation, from her former student. Instead, she saw a calm, poised woman, confident in her success and carrying herself with quiet authority. The teacher could do nothing but watch, powerless, as the woman who had once been mocked moved through the crowd, laughing lightly, sharing stories of her accomplishments. "Is that her?" someone whispered to a friend. "I think so," came the reply, awe mingled with disbelief. The woman didn't seek revenge. There was no malicious satisfaction in turning the tables. Instead, she wanted to demonstrate something far more powerful. That success and dignity were the most effective responses to humiliation. She shared her journey with curious classmates, describing the businesses she had built, the lessons she had learned, and the foundation she had started to help underprivileged children discover and develop their talents. Every word she spoke carried weight, every achievement she described made an impression, and she inspired those around her simply by existing as proof of resilience and determination. Her former teacher could only watch, silent, as the girl's story unfolded. The humiliation of the past had no place here. It had been transformed into triumph. Every mocking laugh that once echoed in the gymnasium had become a distant memory, replaced by pride and accomplishment. Others in the room, classmates who had once ignored her or joined in the laughter, now looked at her with respect, some even with admiration. They saw what true strength looked like, what true perseverance could achieve. When the night ended, she stepped outside once more into the cool air. The breeze wrapped around her like a comforting embrace, familiar yet new. She thought back to that night 10 years ago, to the sting of humiliation and the spark of determination that had been lit in her heart. Now, she was no longer defined by the ridicule of others. She had taken control of her narrative, reshaped her life, and inspired others in the process. She smiled to herself, not with bitterness, but with quiet satisfaction. She had not only survived humiliation, she had transcended it, transformed it into strength, and created a life far beyond the narrow confines of anyone else's expectations. That night, as she walked to her car, she felt lighter, freer. She knew she would continue to grow, to help others, to build a legacy that mattered. The echoes of laughter that had once haunted her were replaced by the sound of her own heartbeat, steady and confident, guiding her forward into a future she had fought for and earned. She had turned a single moment of cruelty into a lifetime of triumph, proving to herself and the world that dignity, perseverance, and success were the ultimate victories. The gymnasium glittered under strings of golden fairy lights that wrapped around the pillars and draped from the ceiling, casting a soft, warm glow over polished wooden floors. Tables lined with crisp white cloths held neatly arranged plates of snacks and glasses filled with punch, and the air hummed with chatter, laughter, and soft music that set a festive tone. Everyone had dressed in their finest. The girls in flowing gowns that shimmered in the light, the boys in tailored suits that gave them an air of confidence. In the midst of it all, a girl stood quietly, clutching the strap of her modest dress. It wasn't flashy or designer, and she knew that. It was simple, homemade almost, but carefully chosen to show that she cared about the evening. Still, the difference between her attire and that of her classmates seemed like a chasm she could never cross. She shifted nervously from foot to foot, tugging at the hem of her dress, wishing she could fade into the walls, disappear entirely. Her heart thudded in her chest as she watched classmates greet each other with laughter, sharing inside jokes she would never understand. She tried to smile politely, nodding at familiar faces, offering brief greetings, but the pit of unease in her stomach wouldn't let her settle. Tonight was meant to be a celebration, yet every glance she caught reminded her of the gap between her and the rest. The gap of wealth, elegance, and social ease. She told herself she would endure, that she would survive this night with her dignity intact, but an underlying fear gnawed at her. What if everyone could see what she had always felt, the invisible mark of being less than? Her fears crystallized in a single, horrifying moment. Across the room, her class teacher, the woman tasked with guiding the students through their final year, paused mid-conversation. Her gaze landed on the girl, sweeping over the modest dress with unmistakable disdain. A cruel smile spread slowly across the teacher's face, sharp and predatory. The girl's stomach clenched. The gymnasium fell into a brief hush, anticipation hanging thick in the air, and then the teacher's words cut through everything like a blade. This graduation is not for beggars. The laughter that followed was immediate, brutal, echoing in every corner. Fingers pointed, classmates whispered, nudged each other, some covering mouths to hide snickers, others openly laughing. The girl felt her cheeks burn, her chest tightening as if the world itself were pressing down on her. Every insult, every whispered joke she had endured over the years, every sideways glance of pity or mockery, all of it coalesced in that single moment. The room seemed to shrink, trapping her in a spotlight of humiliation. She wanted to disappear. She wanted the floor to open beneath her and swallow her whole. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back fiercely, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Every nerve in her body was on fire with embarrassment, shame, and anger. She felt paralyzed, as if moving might somehow make the humiliation worse, but slowly, she forced herself to step forward, to escape. Outside, the night air hit her like a shock, cold and biting, but also oddly comforting. She pulled her coat tighter around herself and walked to the curb, the sounds of laughter fading behind her. She sat down, hugging her knees to her chest, staring at the dark street in front of her. For a long time, she let herself feel the full weight of humiliation and pain. And then, slowly, a spark of determination ignited within her. This would not define her. This night, no matter how cruel, would not break her. She would return, stronger, unstoppable, undeniable. That spark, quiet and fierce, became the seed of a promise she made to herself. One day, she would rise. The years that followed were filled with struggle. Life did not hand her opportunities on a silver platter. She had to fight for every inch of progress. She worked long hours at cafes and stores, her hands blistered and her body exhausted, yet she never allowed herself to quit. During the day, she attended classes, absorbing knowledge like a sponge, dreaming of a future that had once seemed impossible. Nights were spent poring over textbooks, analyzing business plans, budgeting every penny, learning about investments, marketing, and the ways to create success from nothing. Every failure became a lesson. Every small victory was a reminder of her own resilience. Friends often questioned why she pushed herself so relentlessly. They were content with stable but unremarkable lives, with jobs that paid the bills but left dreams dormant. For a moment, she envied them, their comfort, their ability to accept mediocrity. But the envy was fleeting. She remembered that night, the sting of humiliation, the laughter that had once pierced her heart. It became fuel, a fire that refused to die. Her goals were not merely about wealth or prestige, they were about proving, to herself first and foremost, that she could rise above any obstacle. Her journey was not without setbacks. There were nights when exhaustion and doubt threatened to overwhelm her. There were projects that failed, investments that didn't pay off, moments when she questioned whether the sacrifice was worth it. But she persisted, driven by a quiet, unyielding determination. Slowly, steadily, she began to build a name for herself. Her efforts compounded. Businesses grew, partnerships formed, and opportunities she had once dreamed of became real. With every success, she felt the power of that long-ago humiliation transform into triumph. She was no longer the girl who shrank in the corner. She was a woman who created her own space, her own rules, her own future. 10 years later, a letter arrived in the mail, a reunion invitation. She held it in her hands, reading the embossed letters, feeling a strange mix of anticipation and apprehension. The memory of that night, the laughter, the cruel words, rose unbidden. For a moment, she considered ignoring it, but then she smiled. No, she would attend. She would enter that room and show, not with confrontation but with presence, what perseverance, determination, and success could achieve. She would let her life speak for itself. The reunion was held in the same gymnasium, now renovated but still familiar. She entered, her posture straight, her steps measured and confident. Her dress was elegant, perfectly fitted, understated yet commanding attention. Her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, her makeup natural but refined. Heads turned immediately. Whispers filled the room. Some squinted, trying to recognize her. Others whispered to friends, unable to contain their astonishment. She smiled warmly, greeting former classmates with poise and ease, shaking hands and exchanging polite words. And then she saw her, the teacher who had humiliated her so many years ago. The woman froze mid-step, eyes widening, mouth opening slightly before closing again, caught between recognition and disbelief. She had expected perhaps confrontation, perhaps arrogance, but instead she saw calm, poise, and a quiet authority. The girl she had mocked had grown into a woman who radiated confidence, grace, and undeniable achievement. The teacher could only watch, powerless, as she moved through the crowd, sharing stories, laughing lightly, engaging with classmates who now looked at her with admiration. "This is her," someone whispered. "I think so," another replied, awe and disbelief coloring their voice. She did not seek revenge. There was no pleasure in humiliating those who had wronged her. Instead, she wanted to demonstrate something far greater, that success and dignity were the ultimate response to cruelty. She spoke of her businesses, the lessons she had learned, and the foundation she had established to help underprivileged children develop their talents. She shared these stories with humility and confidence, inspiring those around her simply by existing as proof that perseverance and hard work could overcome even the harshest ridicule. The former teacher remained silent, witnessing the transformation she had never imagined. The mocking laughter of the past had been replaced by quiet admiration, not only from classmates but from the girl herself. The humiliation that had once seemed so defining had been transformed into the foundation of her triumph. Others in the room, classmates who had once overlooked her or joined in her ridicule, now looked at her with respect, some with awe. They saw what true strength looked like, what true resilience could achieve. As the evening wound down, she stepped outside into the cool night air. The wind wrapped around her like a comforting embrace, familiar yet new. She thought back to that night, 10 years ago, to the sting of ridicule and the spark of determination that had taken root in her heart. She was no longer the girl crushed by the weight of others' opinions. She was a woman who had forged her own path, risen above adversity, and created a life of dignity, purpose, and impact. She smiled, feeling lighter, freer than she had ever felt. She knew that her journey was far from over. She would continue to grow, continue to help others, and continue to build a legacy that mattered. The echoes of laughter that had once haunted her were replaced by the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat, guiding her forward. She had turned a single moment of cruelty into a lifetime of triumph, showing to herself and the world that dignity, perseverance, and success were the ultimate victories. As she walked to her car, she noticed the stars shining brightly above, each one a silent reminder that the world was vast, full of possibility, and that she had carved her place in it with her own hands. Every step she took was a testament to the girl she once was, the struggles she had endured, and the woman she had become. She had not only survived humiliation, she had transcended it, transforming pain into power, and leaving an indelible mark on everyone who had once doubted her. The gymnasium glowed like a golden palace under the warm fairy lights that twisted around the pillars and draped from the ceiling, reflecting off the polished wooden floors. Tables were covered with crisp white cloths, neatly set with small plates of snacks and sparkling glasses of punch. The air was thick with chatter, laughter, and the soft background of music that floated through the room, blending with the excitement and nerves of the graduating class. Everyone had dressed in their finest, flowing gowns that shimmered like liquid gold, tailored suits that made their wearers stand taller and more confident, and shoes that clicked crisply against the floor. Among all of this, a girl stood quietly in a corner, clutching the strap of her modest dress. It wasn't designer or flashy. It was simple, homemade almost, but carefully chosen to show she had cared about the evening. Even so, she felt like an outsider, a shadow in the light of everyone else's elegance. She shifted nervously from foot to foot, tugging at the hem of her dress. Her heartbeat thumped wildly as she scanned the crowd. Laughter echoed around her, friends hugged, classmates joked, and she smiled politely, nodding when someone greeted her. Yet with every passing glance, she felt the sharp sting of difference. Her dress, her hair, her shoes, all of it marked her as someone who didn't quite belong. She told herself to endure, to survive the night with dignity intact, but a quiet fear gnawed at her. What if they all saw what she had always felt inside, the shame of being less than? She hadn't anticipated the teacher noticing her. Across the room, her class advisor paused mid-conversation, her gaze sweeping over the girl with clear disdain. The woman's lips curved into a cruel smile, slow and deliberate. The girl's stomach twisted. And then came the words, loud and sharp, slicing through the music and laughter. "This graduation is not for beggars." The room erupted in laughter. Fingers pointed. Whispers spread like wildfire. Some tried to stifle giggles, others openly chuckled. The girl's cheeks burned, her chest tightened, and a wave of panic washed over her. Every insult she had ever endured, every sideways glance, every whisper about her family's financial struggles, all of it converged into that single, unbearable moment. It felt as if the walls themselves were closing in, trapping her under a microscope of humiliation. Did she really just say that? Someone whispered behind her. She actually did, another replied, a nervous laugh escaping. She felt her hands tremble. She wanted to vanish, to sink through the floor. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She could feel the weight of every mocking glance pressing down, suffocating. Slowly, mechanically, she turned and walked toward the exit, each step heavy with shame and anger. Outside, the cool night air hit her face, crisp and sharp, and for a moment, she drew a deep breath just to steady herself. She walked to the curb and sat down, hugging her knees to her chest. The streetlights cast a pale glow, and the faint sounds of the celebration filtered through the windows. She thought about every humiliation she had suffered, every cruel word ever spoken. And then, slowly, a spark ignited in her chest. This would not define her. This night, as awful as it was, would not crush her. She would return, stronger, unstoppable. She would be undeniable. That spark, small and fragile, became a seed of promise, a vow to herself that one day, she would rise. The years that followed were filled with struggle and relentless effort. Life gave her no easy opportunities, she had to fight for every inch. She worked nights at cafes, as a barista, cleaning floors, serving tables, her body exhausted, her hands blistered, yet she never allowed herself to quit. During the day, she attended classes, consuming knowledge with the hunger of someone desperate for change. Nights were spent poring over textbooks, analyzing business plans, and researching ways to invest her small earnings wisely. Every failure became a lesson. Every minor success a step closer to her goals. Friends often asked why she pushed herself so hard, why she sacrificed sleep, comfort, and sometimes even social life for a distant dream. They were content with stability, with jobs that paid the bills and routines that kept life predictable. For a fleeting moment, she envied them, the ease with which they accepted mediocrity. But the memory of that night, the sting of humiliation, quickly replaced envy with determination. She had learned early that comfort and complacency were easy, but they never led to growth. She had decided that even if the world laughed at her now, she would one day show it what she was capable of. Her path was not free from setbacks. There were nights when exhaustion threatened to collapse her spirit, moments when projects failed or investments fell through, when the thought of giving up tempted her. Yet she persisted. Slowly, steadily, her hard work began to pay off. She started small businesses, networked tirelessly, and honed skills that allowed her to expand her opportunities. With every success, no matter how small, she felt a quiet triumph, a victory over that long-ago humiliation. She was no longer the girl who shrank in the shadows. She was a woman who carved her own space, her own rules, and her own destiny. 10 years after that fateful night, a letter arrived, the reunion invitation. She held it delicately in her hands, feeling a wave of anticipation and apprehension. Memories flooded back. The laughter, the teacher's cruel words, the feeling of being exposed and laughed at. For a moment, she considered ignoring it. But no, she would attend. This would be her moment to show, without confrontation, the power of perseverance and success. Her life would speak for itself. The reunion was held in the same gymnasium, though slightly renovated. She entered with steady, confident steps, posture straight and shoulders back. Her dress was elegant, understated yet impossible to ignore, fitted perfectly to her form. Her hair fell in soft waves, and her makeup was refined but natural. Heads turned immediately. Whispers spread through the crowd. Some squinted, unsure if they were recognizing her. Others murmured to friends, impressed and a little intimidated. She smiled warmly, shaking hands, exchanging polite words, and sharing brief stories, each movement and word radiating calm authority. Then she saw her, the teacher who had humiliated her so many years ago. The woman froze, eyes widening, mouth opening slightly, then closing again, caught between recognition and disbelief. She had expected confrontation or arrogance, but instead, she saw calm, poise, and authority. The girl she had mocked had grown into a woman whose presence alone commanded respect. The teacher was powerless as she moved through the crowd, laughing lightly, sharing her journey, and engaging classmates who now looked at her with admiration rather than derision. "This is her," someone whispered. "I think so," came the reply, awe and disbelief clear in their tone. She did not seek revenge. There was no joy in humiliating those who had wronged her. Instead, she wanted to demonstrate something far more powerful, that success and dignity are the ultimate responses to cruelty. She spoke of her businesses, the challenges she had overcome, and the foundation she had established to help underprivileged children develop their talents. Her stories were filled with humility and quiet pride, inspiring classmates and teachers alike. They saw that she had turned pain into power, ridicule into determination, and humiliation into triumph. Throughout the evening, flashbacks surfaced. She remembered sneaking extra hours at the library to study when classmates went out, walking home in the rain after a long night of work, the nights she had cried into her pillow, wondering if all her effort would ever amount to anything. She remembered the people who doubted her, the friends who laughed, and the teacher who had publicly shamed her. And she smiled, not with malice, but with quiet satisfaction. All of it had built her. All of it had led her here. The reunion went on, and she spoke to classmates she hadn't seen in years. Some were shocked, some embarrassed, some inspired. She answered questions graciously, sharing insights without arrogance. Every interaction left a lasting impression. She was proof that the world's laughter could not dictate one's worth. By the end of the night, the once cruel teacher could only remain silent, her earlier smugness replaced by an uncomfortable awareness of the girl's transformation. As she stepped outside, the cool night air greeted her. The stars shone above, vast and infinite, and the breeze carried a sense of freedom she had never known. She reflected on the 10 years since that night, on the growth, the failures, and the victories. She had not only survived humiliation, she had transcended it. Every step she had taken, every sleepless night, every challenge faced alone had led to this moment. She felt lighter, freer, unburdened by the opinions of others. She walked to her car slowly, savoring the quiet triumph. Each step was a reminder of her journey, from the girl who sat on the curb, humiliated and alone, to the woman who had claimed her space in the world. The laughter that once haunted her was gone, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of accomplishment. She had transformed pain into purpose, and that purpose now guided her forward, stronger and more determined than ever. She knew her journey would continue, that there were more challenges ahead, but nothing could shake the foundation she had built. She had turned cruelty into courage, humiliation into power, and her past into a story of triumph that would inspire others for years to come. And as she drove away, the city lights reflecting off her windshield, she smiled. The girl who had once been mocked, laughed at, and overlooked now had a voice, a presence, and a life that spoke louder than any insult ever could. She had survived, she had grown, and she had risen. She was unstoppable.